The most fun part of that team for me, I loved it because I wasn't coaching at the time, but the most fun part of it was when we got out on the break.
Ooh, yeah.
And Dwayne was on one wing, and LeBron, no, and then Dwayne would be throwing these
Yeah.
lobs, and then Dwayne would go out of bounds like this, and LeBron would be dunking it, so it reminded me of Showtime in a lot of ways with those three players. But Chris was, without a doubt, people have asked me a lot of questions over the years. They ask about championships. They ask about Showtime, about those battles with Boston, about New York, Miami, and all the great players I was fortunate enough to be around. And I understand why. When you've spent most of your life in this game, people want you to put everything in order. Best team, best season, best player. But, basketball never felt that simple to me. Someone asked me recently, Pat, who are the 5 greatest players you ever saw? I had to think about that one because greatness, to me, isn't just points. It isn't MVP trophies, championship rings, or how many records somebody left behind. I've seen enormously talented players who could take over a game. But the truly great ones could take over something bigger than that. They could change the belief of a locker room. They could force an opponent to prepare differently. They could make the people around them expect more from themselves. That's what stayed with me. So this isn't a ranking. I'm not trying to settle some argument about who's number one. These are simply 5 men who, in my eyes, showed me what greatness really looked like. And, the first one made my life pretty difficult for a long time. Well, let me start with Larry Bird. Larry Bird is one of those guys I never had the luxury of forgetting. When I was coaching the Lakers, you could spend hours preparing for Boston. And a lot of that preparation came back to Larry. You knew where he liked to catch the ball. You knew how he moved without it. You knew he could shoot, pass, rebound, and make the right read before the defense even settled. But knowing all of that and stopping it were 2 very different things. What separated Larry, in my mind, was that he could control the emotional temperature of a game. He didn't need to dominate every possession. Sometimes he'd hit a shot. Sometimes he'd make the pass that led to the shot. Sometimes he'd get a rebound that seemed to matter more than the others. He had a way of making you feel like Boston was always one decision ahead. And, as a coach, that's frustrating because you're trying to remove options. You're trying to make the other team uncomfortable. With Larry, there were nights when it felt like discomfort made him sharper. The 1,984 final stayed with me for a long time. We had the talent to win that series. I believed that then, and I still believe it now. But Boston kept dragging us into a kind of fight that tested more than execution. It tested patience. It tested poise. It tested whether you could stay disciplined when the game stopped looking the way you wanted it to look. Larry was right in the middle of that. By Game 7, there was no mystery left. We knew them, they knew us. There were no secrets. Boston won the championship, and Larry was named Finals MVP. That loss hurt, but it also taught me something important about him. He wasn't just playing basketball. He was applying pressure to your judgment. One mistake became 2. One bad possession became a run. One moment of hesitation was enough for him to find the open man or bury a shot. What I respected most was his competitive honesty. He never needed the game to be pretty. He needed it to be won. That's a quality coaches recognize immediately. We came back and beat Boston the next year, and that meant a great deal to all of us. But beating Larry never made me respect him less. If anything, it made me understand him better. Some opponents make you angry. Some make you cautious. Larry made me think. And after all these years, I believe that's one of the greatest compliments I can give any player. LeBron James came into my life at a very different stage of mine. By then, I wasn't standing on the sideline every night with a whistle around my neck. I was watching the game from another chair, thinking about organizations, chemistry, pressure, and what it takes to build something that can last. And when LeBron came to Miami, I already knew how talented he was. Everybody did. But being talented and carrying championship expectations are 2 very different things. What struck me about LeBron was how much responsibility he could absorb on a basketball court. He could score when you needed scoring. He could create for somebody else. He could rebound, push the ball, defend different positions, and see things developing before most players understood what was happening. You know, there have been great scorers who needed the game, played a certain way. LeBron could change the way the game was being played. But the part of his Miami years that stays with me most isn't some spectacular dunk or one particular stat line. It's what happened after we lost. That first season ended against Dallas in the 2011 finals. There was disappointment everywhere because the expectations had been enormous from the moment that team came together. The easy thing after a loss like that is to start looking for somebody to blame. The harder thing is to come back and become better. LeBron did that. The next season, I watched him play with a different kind of purpose. There was still all that physical ability, of course, but there was more patience in him, more understanding of when to take control and when to trust what was around him. Miami beat Oklahoma City in 5 games in the 2012 finals, and LeBron finally had that first championship. Then the group came back and won again in 2013. I respected that because championships have a way of exposing people. Pressure doesn't create your character. Most of the time, it reveals it. And LeBron had to live under a level of attention that very few athletes have ever experienced. Every loss became a story. Every decision became a debate. Every postseason became a judgment on his entire career. That's a heavy way to play basketball. But he carried it for years. When I think about the truly great players I've seen, longevity matters to me. Staying great is harder than becoming great. Your body changes, the league changes. Younger players arrive believing it's their time. LeBron kept adapting. That's what I remember. Not simply how powerful he was when he arrived in Miami. I remember watching a remarkable player learn how to carry expectations, survive disappointment, and come back stronger. And, well, I've always had a lot of respect for people who can do that. Now, let's talk about Michael Jordan. When I went to New York, I knew exactly what stood between us and where we wanted to go. Chicago had become the standard, and Michael was the center of everything they did. You could study him all afternoon. You could watch film until your eyes hurt. You could put together every defensive idea you had. Then the game started, and he made you reconsider all of it. That's what separated Michael from me. He didn't just attack your defense. He studied what you were trying to do to him. If you showed him one coverage, eventually he'd recognize it. If you tried to make the game more physical, he'd find another way to hurt you. If you forced the ball out of his hands, he understood where it needed to go next. As a coach, you appreciate that kind of intelligence even when it's driving you crazy. I think about the 1,993 Eastern Conference Finals quite a bit. We won the first 2 games in New York. We were physical. We were confident. We believed we had put ourselves in position to finally get past Chicago. Then they responded. By the time the series was tied, you could feel how small the margin had become. Game 5 at Madison Square Garden was especially painful. We had an opportunity late. Chicago got the stop it needed, and suddenly they were going home with control of the series. They finished us in 6 games. What stayed with me wasn't simply that Michael scored. Everybody knew he could score. It was the way he seemed to become more dangerous as the pressure increased. The deeper you went into a series, the fewer weaknesses you could find. And when you're coaching against somebody like that, eventually you understand that you're not really looking for a way to stop him completely. You're trying to make him work hard enough that maybe, just maybe, he becomes human for a few possessions. That didn't happen very often. You know, I've coached great competitors. I've been around men who hated losing so much that it changed the atmosphere in the building. Michael had that quality. There was something relentless about him. He wasn't satisfied because he'd beaten you before. Yesterday didn't matter very much. He wanted today's game too. And that's probably what I respected most. Larry Bird taught me how intelligence could control a game. LeBron showed me how one player could carry almost every responsibility imaginable. Michael showed me something different. He showed me what happens when extraordinary talent is attached to an almost unforgiving desire to win. And after dealing with that from the opposite bench, believe me, I never forgot it. Michael made you understand what it felt like when greatness was coming at you from the other side. Magic Johnson was different. With Magic, I got to see what greatness looked like from inside the same locker room. And believe me, that's a completely different education. I had known him before I became the head coach of the Lakers, of course. Everybody around that team understood immediately that Irvin had something unusual. It wasn't only the size, the passing, or the way he could grab a rebound and turn the entire floor into a fast break. It was the effect he had on people. Some great players control the ball. Magic could control the mood of an entire team. When he was playing with confidence, everybody seemed to run harder. Guys filled the lanes because they believed the ball might find them. Big men kept moving because Magic rewarded movement. Shooters stayed ready because he remembered where everybody was. That matters more than people realize. As a coach, you're constantly trying to create trust. You're trying to convince 5 players that the game becomes easier when nobody is playing for himself. Magic already understood that. Now, that doesn't mean everything was easy. We had expectations every single year. In Los Angeles, especially during that period, winning wasn't treated like some pleasant surprise. It was expected. If you won 60 games and didn't win the championship, people remembered the ending. Magic lived with that pressure, and I watched him grow inside it. The 1,984 finals against Boston hurt all of us. There were moments in that series we knew we had let slip away. Magic took criticism, I took criticism, everybody did. But what I remember is what happened afterward. He didn't run from it. He came back. The following year, we faced Boston again, and this time we finished the job. Winning that championship in Boston Garden meant something because of everything that had happened the year before. That's where Magic impressed me most. Not when he was smiling after a beautiful pass, not when the form was going crazy. It was when something went wrong. He had this ability to take disappointment and somehow keep moving forward without losing who he was. Later, when people talked about Showtime, they usually remembered the speed and the entertainment. I understand that. It was beautiful basketball. But from where I was sitting, Showtime only worked because there was discipline underneath it. Magic understood when to run and when to slow down. He understood when Kareem needed the ball. He understood when James Worthy had a matchup. He knew when another teammate needed to feel involved. That's leadership. It isn't always standing in front of everybody making a speech. Sometimes it's simply knowing what the people around you need. Michael showed me how one player could impose his will on an opponent. Magic showed me how one player could give an entire team belief. And once you've coached somebody like that, you spend the rest of your career understanding just how rare it really is. And then there was Kareem. I had been around great players before, but Kareem Abdul-Jabbar taught me something about greatness that I don't think I fully understood when I was younger. Everybody remembers the skyhook. Of course they do. You could know exactly where he wanted to go, prepare for it, put size on him, bring help, and somehow that ball would still leave his hand from a place nobody could reach. But that wasn't what impressed me most. It was the discipline. By the time I became the head coach of the Lakers, Kareem had already played a lot of basketball. People were constantly wondering when age would finally catch him. That's what happens with older players. Everybody starts looking for the decline before the player himself is ready to accept it. Kareem just kept working. He took care of himself. He understood his body. He understood preparation. And most importantly, he understood that being a professional meant doing the work even when nobody was applauding you for it. I saw that very clearly in the 1985 finals. We went into Boston and got embarrassed in Game 1. It was one of those losses where there wasn't much to hide behind. We had been beaten badly, and Kareem didn't have the kind of game anybody expected from him. He was 38 years old. There were plenty of people ready to say maybe this was finally the moment when time had caught up with him. Then Game 2 came. Kareem responded with 30 points, 17 rebounds, 8 assists, and 3 blocked shots. More important than those numbers was the way he carried himself. There was no panic, no excuse. He simply came back and played like the responsibility belonged to him. That series eventually became one of the most meaningful championships of my career. We beat Boston in 6 games. and Kareem was named Finals MVP. You know, when you're younger, you tend to think greatness is about reaching some incredible level. As I got older, I realized the harder part is staying there. Bodies change, coaches change, teammates change, the league changes around you. Eventually, younger players arrive who have spent their whole lives hearing your name, and now they want to prove they can take something from you. Kareem lived through all of that, and he kept showing up. That's why I've always had such tremendous respect for him. Magic taught me about bringing people together. Michael showed me how ruthless competition could become, but Kareem showed me the value of endurance. Anybody can be inspired for a night. Very few people can remain disciplined for decades. And when I think about the greatest players I've ever been fortunate enough to witness, that's the part of Kareem I remember first. Not the records, not even the skyhook. The standard he kept for himself year after year, long after most people would have understood if he had lowered it. When you spend as many years around this game as I have, you eventually learn that the trophies aren't what you think about first. Championship banners stay in the arena, records get broken, people argue about statistics, eras, and who belongs above somebody else. That's part of basketball. But, you know, those arguments don't mean as much to me anymore. What stays with me are the people, the guys who forced me to become a better coach, the players who carried an entire locker room when the pressure became uncomfortable, the opponents who made me go home after a game and wonder what else we could possibly try. I was fortunate enough to see basketball change several times during my life. Different styles, different generations, different kinds of superstars. But the truly great ones always had something in common. They made everybody around them raise their standard. That's what I remember now. Not whether somebody was first, second, or fifth. I'm just grateful I was close enough to greatness for long enough to recognize what it looked like. And after all these years, I can tell you this: you never forget it.